So we know we have a desire to pray, but what do we do when we get there? That's always a question. What do I do in my prayer? Well, remember that the first two things that we talked about are paramount in allowing us to do what we need to do when we get there. The first is acknowledging why I'm there. First, Lord, I am here because I'm acknowledging that I have an infinite thirst and you have the eternal answer to my infinite thirst. And in fact, the eternal answer is your thirst for mine. And so when I go to prayer, one of the things I'm doing, I'm focusing on the Lord. All my attention is upon him. It's not on my thirst, it's upon his. And so I'm attentive to God's desire for me. And that's why I start to speak to him in that warm-up. The warm-up, again, is all about us being able to calm our minds and our hearts so that we can sit in the presence of the Lord and focus upon him. There's two parts of that warm-up then. One is to get me into prayer so that I don't leave before I actually start praying, so I don't get frustrated, so I can just start speaking to him and start proclaiming what I'm there to do. I'm here to focus on you, Lord. But by doing that, the offspring of that focus, of that warm-up, is going to be us calming our minds and our hearts. And once we do that, that's going to help us sustain our time there, because now I want to stay. Now I'm in your presence and I'm feeling calm and I'm experiencing peace. And so I want to stay there. Well, what do I do when I get to prayer? Remember this. Remember that prayer is not about doing something. It's about being with someone. Oftentimes, if we try to fill our prayer with things to do, we're willfully distracting ourselves from the very person that we're spending time with. St. John of the Cross, who's a doctor of our church, taught us about prayer, about the depths of prayer. He and his contemporary St. Teresa of Avila. But John of the Cross would say that if we want to know what to do in prayer, it's all about the tranquility of our spirit, so the calmness, right? Calming ourselves down, calming our spirit down so that we can sit in loving attentiveness to our Lord. In loving attentiveness. I love those words. Whenever I'm distracted in prayer, I get so distracted that I wonder, what am I even doing here? I always bring myself back to that line of John of the Cross, reminding myself, I'm here to sit in loving attentiveness to our Lord. So Lord, how can I be attentive to you? By the way, one way to train for prayer, maybe we need to practice and get ready for prayer. One of the ways to do that is to sit in loving attentiveness to the people that are in your life. And that means not being on your phone when you're talking to your parents or you're talking to your friends. It's actually being attentive to them who's in front of you. And if we can do that, I guarantee that's going to help us when we get to prayer to not fill our prayer with those kinds of distractions. So people ask, what about reading a book? Should I read a book in prayer? Well, really, this is a time for meditation. This is my time for speaking with God. And so really, reading a book should be done before I get to prayer. That should be those spiritual nuggets that I experience in a book should be the things that maybe I come to converse with God about because I'm so interested in how to live those things. So maybe instead of distracting my prayer and my loving attentiveness from the Lord and reading a book, I use my book when I get distracted in prayer. So I get distracted, my mind is wandering, I'm not attentive to the Lord. I open up that book where I have highlighted or I've circled, or I go back to that page that was profound to me, and I just read it again to bring my mind back to loving attentiveness to the Lord. What about Rosary? Should I pray my Rosary during my time of meditation? Well, if you're praying just 15 minutes a day, you're praying a half an hour a day, it's going to fill your entire time of prayer, and it's going to fill maybe half of your time of prayer. Really, the Rosary should be used as a devotion outside of your time of meditation. And it can help us to enter back into loving attentiveness, though. So if I'm distracted in prayer, maybe I grab those beads and I say, I don't know what else to pray on. I don't know what else to converse with God about. I'm very distracted right now. I grab the beads and maybe I pray 1 decade of the Rosary, right? Because that's going to help me to enter back into a mystery of the Lord's life, to focus my heart and my mind back on Him. And that's what prayer is all about, focusing my mind and my heart back on Him, loving attentiveness. Other people say, should I journal during prayer? Well, it depends on what you mean by journal. If it's distracting us from conversation with God, then no. If I'm sitting there writing a letter to somebody else or writing all my thoughts down, maybe that's not the best thing to do in prayer. But if I'm using my journal to maybe speak to God, because sometimes I don't have the word to say, but maybe I can writing a letter to God sometimes can be a great tool of prayer. And Another way that we use a journal maybe is to write down all the fruits of my prayer, the things that maybe I experienced the Lord saying to me, or an inspiration that I have while I'm sitting in the presence of the Lord so that I don't forget it. Maybe it's part of my discernment process, right? So I'm writing those things down. So that's helpful to if it keeps our loving attentiveness on the Lord, that's the way we use our journal. But we're not there to write letters. We're not there to write a book. We're not there just to be inspired by God. All of the things that we use in prayer should be bringing our loving attentiveness back to Him. So remember that prayer, about sustaining prayer, is all about our attention on the Lord. It's not about our thirst. It's about focusing our loving attentiveness on His eternal thirst for ours.